Welcome to Hidden Gem or Hidden Trash. Today we're gonna take a look at 4 indie RPGs, all interesting with unique perks. Are they any good though? We're about to find out, so let's begin. The first contender is called This Way Madness Lies, developed by Boyd Games, the guys behind Cosmic Star Heroine and Cthulhu Saves Christmas. I'm a huge fan of those two, among my favorite indie RPGs ever. So is this one just as good or did it disappoint? Let's start with the positive. A theater group of high schoolers, all girls, focus on reenacting Shakespeare plays. However, they're all also magical girls with powers. Such powers enable them to enter portals that lead them to Shakespeare worlds invaded by monsters, so they need to save them. Yes, you guessed it, this is a comedy like most RPGs from these guys. It's silly, it's funny, and it never takes itself seriously. So you'll be watching short scenes in school where you as a player has to answer some Shakespeare trivia correctly. Nothing happens if you make a mistake, your choices don't affect anything. You'll also watch small talk with the girls. Often you'll get into random boss fights without even being in a dungeon or area. I like this idea. I also like how the game randomly picks your party members during these segments, but not during the first areas. The game forces you to use every girl, but that's okay because you get acquainted with all of them, and then halfway through, you'll be able to take whoever you want with you. Imogen, though, the main character, will always be mandatory. Traversing in colorful areas feels great in the usual 16-bit graphics. It's a really good looking RPG. Music by Joshua Quinn is awesome, with some really catchy themes and memorable songs. Sound just never disappoints with these guys, never. Combat is a very small variation of the same combat seen in other games. Every girl can equip a variety of skills. The large majority of them can only be used once per battle, but using a turn to recharge will bring them all back. I love this combat since you always need to strategize what's the best ability to use first during every battle. My advice is to use debuffs and poison status effects on everybody. 2 girl combination moves are also available since the start, once per battle. They can be very useful too. Several difficulty settings are there, easy is fine, but normal is the best way to get a decent challenge. Finally, besides learning combat abilities, every girl can learn passive skills. However, they can only equip 3 of these traits at a time, each with a different effect, though they also may increase their stats. Positives are as follows: fun humor, awesome combat, fantastic soundtrack, beautiful graphics, and addictive gameplay. Let's discuss the negative now. Like every RPG from these guys, this is a really short one. It can be completed in about 6 hours or so. That's not really a negative for me, but I know it'll be for some of you. One major thing I disliked from this game is the story and characters. I said the humor was fun, and it is, but I honestly thought it'll be a mockery of idol culture and magical girls. Instead, they took that part with real development and molded the personalities of each character seriously. What I'm trying to say is that there's no joke within the magical world stuff or the magical girls stuff. It's like these guys really do like their Sailor Moon influence. Well, I don't, and I was expecting the writing to actually criticize that stuff, and it just didn't. Gameplay-wise, all I have to say is that while I absolutely love the combat, as I mentioned before, it's quite similar to that of their previous games. I'd understand if this was a series, but it isn't. The games stand alone, not connected to any other game in existence, so why reuse the same battle system? It's almost identical to all of their previous games. I think a big change is necessary, not just a variation or evolution of the same combat. So my negatives are recycled combat, uninteresting characters, disappointing humor. Yes, the humor is both a positive and a negative for me. In some areas it's fine, in others it's just lame. Nevertheless, those negatives are more personal than anything. Not a single time did I feel like giving up on the game or quitting on it for good. One of the positives I mentioned was addictive gameplay, and that should be more than enough to let you know this is an excellent video game. So obviously, despite my personal pet peeves, I deem this game as a hidden gem. Our next contender is Noob the Factionless. Or is it the Factionless Noob? Whatever the case, this is a turn-based RPG from France, developed by studios Olidri and Black Pixel. Is it any good? Let's start with the positive. Two friends join in an MMORPG called Horizon version 4.2 to play and reach level 100. Two more people join them with their characters. It's mostly a charming comedy that doesn't take itself too seriously. The humor is fun. The adventure will take place in the game itself with a traditional style of gameplay. If you've ever played an MMORPG, you'll notice there's an initial town with your shops and all, including NPCs to talk to and a bunch of classic side quests. The graphics are simple yet appealing and the music is alright. Exploration is done smoothly in most areas, towns and dungeons, with good controls. Nothing sluggish or convoluted. You can see the enemies around and thankfully there aren't many, though they may be very hard to avoid once they spot you. Battles are played in turns. This is an indie RPG, so like 90% of them, it's inspired by the classics, which means combat is just as classic as it gets with everyone having a standard menu for every action. However, this is a job-based video game, but you can't just randomly change a character's job here. Each of the 4 protagonists comes with a set of native jobs, like Neo-Gician for Bastard, the main characters. He can equip things like guns, for example, and his skill tree will unlock from 3 different equipment settings. On the other hand, the character Lux, for example, is an elementalist, which is basically a healer. He only has 1 skill tree, but can change his helmet at any time to adapt to enemy strengths and weaknesses. It's pretty cool! Going back to battle, characters will act based on their skill tree. Mei, for instance, has a limited use of spell cards that go from a lightning bolt to inflict status effects like bleed. I like this combat, it's nothing that original or special, but it delivers an enjoyable experience. Overall, the positives are as follows: interesting premise, decent combat, cool job system, and traditional gameplay. On the negative side, we've got a few things to worry about. You're seeing the first major problem with the game. Loading it takes forever. And I mean it. Come on. Just a little bit more. Are we there yet? Finally! Inside the game, it's not like this, so don't worry, but loading between some areas or events can take its sweet time. Also, once you unlock the world map, the frame rate drops considerably. Graphics are smooth anywhere else, as I mentioned before, but in the overworld, they're buggy and laggy. For whatever reason, I couldn't access this area no matter how much I tried. I was supposed to enter this tower, but the action button wouldn't work. I had to go all the way back to town and return to make it reset and work. This game is available on all modern platforms, but the version I played is the PS4 one. I'm not sure if the other versions have issues like this. Now, I've no problems with the story, but the gameplay does have a couple of bad perks. I'm not a fan of equipment bound by levels. For example, if you aren't level 5, you can't equip this or that. It's nothing too bothersome, but I'm just not a fan of that. And lastly, you have to complete a floor of the tower I showed before to advance from level 10. Every time you reach 10 levels, you'll be capped until you complete 1 floor. Why? It feels kinda like a dumb and unnecessary penalty, but whatever. And the graphics, while colorful, well, you've been seeing them this entire segment. The game looks generic, almost as if it were for phones. So the negatives are some frame rate issues, some bug issues, some loading time issues, looks generic, and dumb penalties that I don't personally like. It's okay, these games' negatives aren't too bad, fortunately, and they can easily be overlooked. I get the feeling its biggest problem for many of you is gonna be that it looks and feels kinda generic, like one of those millions of indie RPGs for phones, but if you can get past that, I think you're gonna have a fun time. While nothing that special, this is still honestly a hidden gem. Moving on to Dusk Diver 2, a sequel to a beat-em-up with RPG elements. This one, however, feels more like an action RPG than anything. Hopefully it'll be a hidden gem, or will it be hidden trash? Let's find out. Developed by Taiwanese studio Wanin and published by Idea Factory. Yes, it's necessary to play the first game first, since this is a direct sequel to it. Once again, it takes place in the district of Shimending, where Yumo and her friends fight interdimensional monsters who seek to invade. Plot is alright here, but the character development is more interesting. It's what I like to call a character-driven game. Now, the first thing to tell is that the first game was low budget and felt small compared to this one. Here, all of that improved. The town has been expanded, the areas are bigger, missions are longer, and the narrative grew a lot more. Graphics look amazing, better than before, including the art style, which improved greatly. You will find a bunch of cool music themes in here as well. Controlling any character feels nice, even though some camera angles can get in the way sometimes. You'll explore town just like before, coming across stores, you know, the usual stuff. The missions, however, are the highlight of this action RPG. Once you enter one, you won't be able to leave without losing your progress. They can be long and tough, so it's necessary to be prepared before going in. Combat is an improved beat-em-up style with more moves and skills. Fighting is awesome here, and it feels very satisfactory, especially when controlling Yumo. In the first game, you had no allies, other characters acted as summons that could execute an attack and that's it. Here, you do have them all as playable party members, each with their own skill tree and fighting style. Once you fill up that burst bar to a max percentage, you can transform temporarily to kick some ass big time. It's awesome. So the positives are great combat, addition of party members, beautiful graphics, cool soundtrack, and expanded gameplay. Sadly, there's a lot of negative things to say about this game. Like many indies out there, it's ridiculously hard, up to the point of being unbalanced. It has no difficulty settings. Most enemies are a cakewalk and barely put up a fight. You just wipe the floor with them with no challenge whatsoever. Still though, they take forever to kill. On the other hand though, most bosses are straight up impossible. Without the right level or player skill, they will wipe the floor with you. Some will do it instantly with cheap moves, draining your health in seconds, but others will waste your time just for having tons of unnecessary HP. This one, for example, you have to break its legs first in order to do some actual damage for a short while. Bosses like these were in the first game too, but they were way more balanced than the cheap bastards here. What makes it all the more unnerving is what I mentioned before. Starting a mission means you gotta complete it including the boss, so if you're under-leveled or even on a decent or recommended level, you're done for! You're gonna have to exit the stage, grind a lot somewhere, and then complete the entire mission again just to reach that cheap boss. To make matters 10 times worse, experience points that you use to raise stats are shared amongst the party. In other words, you guessed it, this game's a freaking grindfest. Negatives? Well, unbalanced difficulty, unfair boss fights, experience penalties, enemies take forever to kill, especially bosses, and frustrating challenge. Man, this damn game, so many great things about it, all ruined by its horrible balance. I know some of you crave these types of action RPGs nowadays, so everything I said might be positive instead of negative to you, but others will definitely stay away for good. I honestly can't decide if this is a hidden gem or hidden trash. I rage quit on it, and I don't think I'll ever go back to it, so it's a bit of a tie here. Recommended hidden gem for hardcore players, disappointing hidden trash for regular players. Today's final contender is Plague Road, a very weird but very unique hybrid, one of those that mixes turn-based with grid-based strategy. Let's find out if it's hidden gem or hidden trash. Developed by Arcade Distillery, this game tells the story of a plague doctor during, well, the plague. But in this world, monsters roam that are also making things worse. The doctor's goal is to rescue undead survivors and have them join his ranks to fight these very same creatures. You go around in creepy yet colorful graphics with eerie design. The visuals are absolutely brilliant here. It's definitely the one thing that stands out the most. Controls are fully in 2D as you explore different areas with the scenery, the nature in the way. You can see the enemies around, so upon making contact, a battle will start. So this is a turn-based system, but characters move on grids. The doctor will always be mandatory and he can mostly shoot from a distance. Eventually he can learn more skills, like the slash skill for example. His allies will be the survivors I mentioned. There's a wide variety of them and more will join as you make progress. Although keep in mind, each can only execute one type of attack, being magical, melee, ranged, healing, etc. These allies are beings that you encounter around, but you need to rescue them first. Simply by pressing a button, they'll go straight to the farm, your base of operations. Here is where you decide which ones to add to your party, which can be up to 4 plus the doctor. You can also dismiss them or revive them if they died, and this is also where you train your doctor to learn those different skills I mentioned. The positives are as follows: beautiful visuals, unique premise, and interesting grid-based combat. On the negative side, okay, here we go. The music is quite atmospheric. It fits the game and its eerie design, but not the colorful visuals. Often you forget there's music playing in the background. Stories barely there, told through interaction with very few NPCs that give you side quests. So while the premise is good, its narrative is just as forgettable as its music. Combat is interesting, but it gets old real quick. Very few RPGs in existence have achieved a good grid-based combat that's not a strategy RPG. This isn't one of them. There's too much meaningless exploration with tons of dead ends and very hard to avoid enemies. Since nobody gains experience here, fighting feels useless, and since battles are slow because of the grid-based system, it ultimately feels like a chore. But you can't even run away! Once you get into a battle, you have to complete it. Rarely any boss fights, you mostly fight the same enemies over and over and over again. And there can be up to 2 or 3 in the same small area. I can't believe a game with so much potential and personality had this terrible gameplay design. The negatives? Boring gameplay, boring plot, boring characters, boring music, boring everything! That's the thing with this game, it's extremely boring and extremely repetitive. I really wanted to like it because it seemed dark, unique and interesting, but as a video game it just fails in all areas. But there's nothing technically wrong with it, it's just lame, tedious and very forgettable. It's really, really bad. Obviously I deem this game as hidden trash. These 4 indie RPGs were today's contenders for this episode of Hidden Gem or Hidden Trash. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next episode!